In this video, I interview Christopher Sharp, who created the publication Liberation Times. According to Twitter, his first article came out in August of 2021, so he's freshly on to the scene. However, I have seen, by recollection, people like George Knapp, Bryce Zabel, Ross Coulthart, and even Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon retweet his articles. So he's already has, even at his infancy, at covering the UAP issue, made quite a significant impact. And frankly, it is without question one of my absolute favorite publications covering UAP, because I think it's done in a very thorough, holistic, sophisticated, and intellectual way and manner. So it's an honor to have been able to have him join me for an interview, something I'll probably start doing more often. Let's go. So Chris, I noticed that you tweeted out on March 9th, 2022, and you were quoting an article you wrote that published on February 23rd titled, "Congress Won't Accept UFO Obfuscation Any Longer, Expect Fireworks Soon." And you wrote, "In light of recent developments, I think this article is becoming vindicated." Could you elaborate why you think that article is becoming vindicated at this point in time?
Yes, of course, yes. So it's becoming vindicated because the pressure is piling on the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security, Lou's old office, which has taken over the function of the UAP office, now known as AOIMSG. So the pressure's being piled on now that, in addition to the briefings required in the National Defence Authorization Act of 2022, they now, and plus on top of that, an annual unclassified report with a classified annex. On top of all that, they now have to release all the UAP data immediately. Well, that's in reference to, I think it's some other components within the DoD and Intel community. But sorry, on top of all that, so it needs to release all the data on UAP immediately from all these other components, and it has to provide a further 4 reports per year, so quarterly reports. So, I mean, I've just gone over this actually. I'm doing an article right now. I think there's in total, may want to edit it later, but from my understanding, 6 briefings and reports are due this year to congressional committees. It really is the year of the UFO.
And who put that into legislation? Because that's asking for a lot. That's not like 1 report a year or even 2 reports a year. I mean, they really went full on, like, you're going to tell us, and you're going to tell us regularly and consistently. So who exactly is responsible for putting such aggressive language into the legislation to ensure that they're constantly being updated on UAP activity and knowledge of this phenomenon?
Great question. It all seems to come out of 2 committees. So the intelligence committees, so when I say committees, I mean, because we're talking about both Senate and House committees here. So the intelligence and the armed service committees of the House and Senate, they seem to be leading it, with the likes of Gillibrand and Rubio kind of like leading things there, leading the charge, you might say. So the Intelligence Authorization Act, which was passed as part of the funding legislation, that basically was, that means that those quarterly reports need to go to the Intelligence and Armed Services Committee, which is what Gillibrand sits on, for instance, and Rubio and Warner and Heinrich. So those need to go there. And then when you're talking about the National Defence Authorization Act briefings, those 2 committees, it's the same. So those 2 committees are going to get those, all 6 basically. But in addition to that, I think the Foreign Affairs Committee is going to receive the semi-annual briefings within the NDAA, and the Appropriations Committees as well, which control the purse strings, let's say. So I find that very interesting as well. But I mean, yeah, it seems to come out of them, and I just think that the pressure is really piling on Lou's old office here in terms of getting results. They're going to be scrutinized like never before. Plus, there's an IG evaluation ongoing as well. So, I mean, I can't imagine what it's like at the moment working for Lou's old office, you know. If I was working on this project, I'd be having sleepless nights.
So, you know, when we examine what members of Congress have said regarding the phenomenon, there's not one example that I know of those that have been actually given classified briefings where they've thrown cold water on what they've seen or what they've been informed about. And so even now, they must have been given some kind of information that inspired them to go to this length. Because, for example, Kirsten Gillibrand and Marco Rubio have run for president, and they, as far as I understand, plan to run for president again. Now, it's just basic common sense that if there's nothing really compelling behind these briefings they've received, they probably would want to sort of distance themselves from the subject and throw cold water on it and not hype it up to the extent that they have. So already from a foundational level, they've been told a lot. They've seen a lot. So my question for you, Chris, is at this stage in the game, considering that and considering the fact that we have the NDAA and the Intelligence Authorization Act and all this legislation that's highly demanding, do you think it's even conceivable or even possible that the agencies within the United States government can obfuscate and or lie like it appears they did in the past regarding UAP? And if the answer is no, do you think that legitimately means that sooner or later they're going to be that the Congress is going to be given such high level, high fidelity information that the entire Congress or everyone given those classified briefings are going to unanimously believe that we are not alone in the universe? What's your take on that?
That's a very good question. Yeah. The pressure is being cranked up like never before right now on those who may try to obfuscate. At the moment, the focus was very much on the DoD and the intelligence community. So obviously those elements within the Department of Energy haven't really been given that pressure yet, and I'm sure that will come sooner or later. But yeah, there's increasing pressure. Lou spoke about providing an amnesty period as well for those who want to provide information. And let's not forget at the end of the day that the Congress is very powerful. It has a lot of tools at its disposal. It can control purse strings. So if I'm Frank Kendall, for instance, the Air Force Secretary, and I'm saying, you know, there's lots of other things more important than UAP.
Which he did. He said that. He said that it's not real high on his priority list. And didn't Lou Elizondo, it's a quote that I think I discussed with you about the Potomac. Could you share that quote of Lou Elizondo where he basically was criticizing the Secretary of the Navy, Frank Kendall, for trying to downplay UAP? And he was like, well, it's like if a submarine emerged in the Potomac. Could you share that quote with the audience?
Correct. I need to find. Yeah, but basically what he was saying is that so these things are flying in our airspace all the time, basically, and the East Coast instance, they're not too far away from the White House, and the speed that they can actually go at, it could be a credible security threat, and you can liken it to actually a submarine, so, coming up on the Potomac next to the White House, and just because it doesn't have a country's flag, you just like, okay, nothing to worry about here. And it's the same situation with UAP. Just because it doesn't have a Russian or Chinese flag, people like shrug their shoulders, say, oh yeah, we don't know what it is, it's too hard, we're just going to give up. And that's just weird. I was having this conversation the other day, actually, because it's weird in two facets. The first being that you don't know what it is, so how do you know if it's a threat or not? you can't just shrug your shoulders at this. I mean, this is your responsibility here. There is something going on. And also, by the way, it's affecting your pilots who are suffering from radiation burns, microwave damage, and loss of time as well, not to mention psychological trauma as well that I know that many have experienced. But also the fact that this is technology, from our understanding, that exhibits something that we don't understand. Do you really think the world's biggest superpower is just going to let that rest? Oh yeah, there's stuff going on at hypersonic speeds. Cool. That's cool. We're just going to leave that. No, I'm sorry. That's not how it works. I mean, if you're the USA, your strategic imperative is to remain top dog in terms of defense. You do not let that kind of technology rest and say, there's nothing we can do. You want to get that technology because that will provide you with strategic dominance.
Don't you think that's an indication, or don't you think, do you think that's an indication how these governmental agencies have opted not to inform the Congress of these incursions for presumably decades? And even now, when they're sharing the information, there seems to be a theme of downplaying it. That we saw that with Frank Kendall, who said it's not real high on his priority list, which of course is ridiculous. If something is outperforming our own hardware, the fact that it doesn't have a flag on it doesn't mean it shouldn't be high on your priority list. It really should be high on your priority list. It's technology that surpasses basically or authentically all known technology, at least if you listen to the radar operators and the pilots. But don't you think this sort of downplay that's coming out of the government sort of, if you read between the lines, it basically demonstrates that they've known all along that this is not adversaries? Because if they knew, right, they knew these UAP were adversaries, don't you think that there would be a lot much more alarmism and they would not have hesitated to share this information more readily with oversight committees within the Congress and government personnel? What's your take on that?
I think you have to play devil's advocate at the end of the day. They've not ruled it out as being adversarial technology in terms of Russia or China. Play devil's advocate. If that's still on the table, officially, even though unofficially people really do realise it's not that kind of technology, then you've got to play that to your advantage. Especially if Frank Kendall is going to shrug his shoulders at that kind of stuff. I mean, like, if you're actually an opponent that's very, very intelligent and clever, like China or Russia, for instance, then maybe it's to your advantage not to plant a flag on that kind of technology. Who knows? Let's just play devil's advocate here. And that's not being ruled out. And it's time that, Secretary Kendall actually does his job. And is he really going to, for something that's not seen as priority, sacrifice and put at risk budgets for the Air Force, let's say, through not sharing data for something, by the way, that doesn't matter. Doesn't matter, but we're not going to release all the data.
Exactly. Doesn't matter, but we don't want to tell you about it. But it's no big deal. It means nothing, but we don't want to tell you about it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And go on YouTube, and you can see dozens of videos of MiG fighter jets, captured from U.S. Navy warships and fighters, for instance. They'll release that when it suits them, and that's fine. But when it comes to iPhone footage of something, by the way, which isn't a priority, that's obviously too far.
Yeah, and so we've been hearing about these drones. We've been hearing about them on the East Coast. We've been hearing about it on the West Coast. I was just reading up a little bit on the USS Omaha case from 2019, where reportedly there was a minimum of 14 objects, at least 6 feet in circumference. One of them had footage taken of it, where I think it was quote unquote flying alongside the Omaha for at least an hour, only to plummet into the water. According to Corbell, from his sources, a submarine pursued it, didn't find it, found nothing that no sign that it was destroyed. The implication is that it might have been using transmedium technology, which, as far as we know, does not exist on that scale. So truly a UAP. And then we've heard about all of the UAP that are seen on the East Coast. Lieutenant Ryan Graves, former pilot, F-18 pilot or aviator, when he was on 60 Minutes, he explained that aviators, pilots were seeing these things almost on a daily basis, and that it just wasn't like with one sensor, it was with multiple sensors that were picking them up and verifying that there were weird things out there. And so what do you think are the odds that we're dealing with Russian technology or Chinese technology? Do you think there's pretty good odds we're dealing with Russian or Chinese technology? Or do you actually think the odds are better that we're dealing with something truly unknown? What's your take on that?
I think in the cases that have actually been described within the UAP preliminary assessment, where UAP exhibits technology which seems to be, outside of our knowledge of kind of like technology and physics, it is not Russian or Chinese. Well, firstly, the fact that these things have to land. Where do they go? That if they're going to loiter up in the sky for so long, they're going to be found because the US is going to go after it. So, firstly, where do they go? And secondly, I think what you've seen from what's happened in Ukraine, that Russia simply does not have the technology in terms of UAV. And I would add to that, although we know that Chinese drone technology may be more technologically advanced, we also know that that they're struggling with their next generation of fighter jet technology in terms of jet propulsion technology and stuff. So, I just doubt that they have that level of technology. And I know one of my sources who's very, very high up with a big US defense contractor, let's say, and it's absolute rubbish. The US. And also, he's in a position to know because the US defense budget for the last 70 years has dwarfed the Chinese defense budget. Even its black budget has dwarfed the Chinese defense budget. I think it's highly unlikely that the Chinese have actually been able to exhibit that kind of technology. The only technology, or the big technology that we know that Chinese do have an advantage over is hypersonic technology, which the US is now trying to catch up on. And by the way, it's quite funny because Secretary Kendall doesn't believe that pursuing hypersonic technology is necessary for the US strategic objectives, which is quite funny. No, there's no way. These things, they're just beyond what we know. And I've spoken to people within the DoD and defense contractors, and they're in a position to know. One of the things I remember, I think Ryan Graves saying is like, okay, let's say they are Chinese or Russian drones. Well, why are they there day after day, week after week, month after month? Like, isn't there a point where they've collected all of the intelligence they need, but yet they're like loitering out there? I think in the New York Times article, it said sometimes for like 12 hours at a time, which, by the way, as far as I know, drones don't have that capacity to loiter or to fly for 12 hours at a time without refueling. And the Carrier Strike Group has all these incredibly powerful censored mechanisms, and we still don't know where they're coming from. We still don't know where they're going. Look, I understand people assume that, statistically it's got to be more likely it's Chinese or Russian, because, well, the Chinese and Russians are interested in spying on our military exercises. Yeah, but you know what? Whatever this is might also be interested in looking at our military exercises, particularly when you look back at the 70-year history. It's well documented that they seem to be attracted to nuclear energy. And some of these warships, or maybe the warships don't have nuclear power, but I do think the aircraft carrier has nuclear power. The submarines have nuclear power. And with carrier strike groups, they kind of travel all together. And so that's really interesting. So what do you think the unclassified UFO report, I think that's due on October 31st of this year, what do you think is going to be in there? Because from my perspective,
like they can't keep this charade up forever, right? Like you were discussing, all of this pressure is being put on them, and it's not trivial pressure. It's real pressure. And maybe you can discuss a little bit about Kirsten Gillibrand at I think it's called the confirmation hearing with with his name is Robert Stork, who might become the Inspector General, and she was asking him some hard questions. Maybe you could go into that, but also go into what you think could be in the unclassified report due on October 31st. And yeah, that's what I'll ask you.
Yeah, sure. So in those confirmation hearings, it was evident that Kirsten Gillibrand was very, very frustrated from the process. From my discussions with Susan Goff, it seems as though AOI-MSG is currently working at 2021 level, so the implementation of the guidance, as they put it, although it's legislation/law, which was in the National Defence Authorization Act, has not been implemented yet. So I think that OUSD INS has actually been kind of like trying to buy as much time as possible before they actually show their hand. By the way, which they have to do now because they've got the money, so it has to actually start implementing stuff. But I think this whole kind of like process of obfuscation has really, really annoyed Kirsten Gillibrand, and I think she wants this to be at the top of the desk of the new IG for the DoD. So it's definitely a priority. And by the way, I will also add as well that Secretary Kendall and other officials have to be confirmed by such committees as well. So obviously, Kendall was in position now, but the likes of Gillibrand and Rubio, if they're not president, are going to be there for years in the Senate, and they will not confirm. They expect that question to come up a lot. Let's say for the next Secretary of the Air Force,
at the confirmation hearings, you're saying.
Yeah. So when there's a new secretary due for the Air Force, for example, and they go for their confirmation hearing again, expect that question to come up, because I think such committees now will actually be looking to ask those questions to make sure that they've got someone who's going to be on side. So yeah, I just wanted to caveat that. Obviously, it's too late now. We've got right. Kendall in position, although I can expect that he's probably under some pressure at the moment. And then in terms of what we can expect from October, I think I'm hoping that there's something really, really big. I'm thinking about this in my own head at the moment. Senators, politicians in general, are very, very cautious when it comes to this stuff. And they know that midterms are coming up in November this year. The report is obviously due in October. And they'll realise that, such a, for 70 years, fringe topic will provide a means of attack for political opponents, especially in tighter races, let's say. So, if I'm running against Rubio, for instance, in Florida, and I want to attack him, I could just come up with some kind of like thing that, yeah, he's into UFOs and stuff. Do you really want this guy who's focusing on UFOs, winning the Senate seat? This is what he's devoting his time to, Floridians, this is just silly. Vote for me instead. I can see that happening. I can see such a thing happening. So I think that the likes of Rubio and Gillibrand and everyone who's put their reputation on the line for this, they want to be vindicated. They want the data out. They want results. So
in other words, since Marco Rubio and Kirsten Gillibrand have put so much stock and been so into the subject and been so aggressive, they want to be proven that they're not crazy. And they could do that through the confirmation hearings and asking questions and pressuring the government not to make things up so that what they say aligns with the UFO issue, but to just tell the truth. Is that what you're getting at?
They want the data released, I think. I think they're looking for a compelling video to be released, or they're looking for something within that report which basically states that, look, this is something which is real. It's not Russian or Chinese. It's not natural phenomena. We do really have to look at the non-human intelligence aspect now. Just something along those lines, something that's going to provide a headline that they can actually run with and say, look, I was right. I was vindicated on this topic. I think that's really what they're looking for. yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see actually how it all plays out. But I'm expecting, if I'm them right now, I'm desperate for results. Firstly, I want it to come out of the OUSD INS. That is an oversight office. You want it with someone like Space Force. You want it with Space Force, okay? They have the resources, and it's within the branch of the US Air Force as well. So you want resources like NORAD and things like that, and the radar capabilities. You want that at your disposal, basically. You do not want an oversight office, basically, just pinning you down on this, which doesn't really have the capability to do anything. It can't even contract, for example, I've been told. So it's just not going to work. You want this with a proper kind of office with teeth that's willing to actually get the job done. So I think that's what they want.
What will it take to get this? So will we be able to get it out of the OUSDI INS is what it called?
So
yeah, well,
OUSD.
Is that what you think they want to do? Is to get it out of that office? Since like you said, it's an oversight. They deal with oversight. How are they going to actually implement the legislation?
Absolutely. How are they going to do it? That is the big question at the moment. The people I'm speaking to, that's the question we've got. How are they actually going to do this? How can they pull this rabbit out of the bag? They simply can't. And if I'm Avril Haines, if I'm Kathleen Hicks, I'm really frustrated as well, because I think if I'm them, I'm probably thinking, gosh, congressional committees are on at me now because I've gone ahead with this. I've been maybe misled by certain aspects within the OSDINS, for example. That's what they might be thinking right now. So I think time is running out for this office, this lose old office, to actually pull a rabbit out of the bag. I think they may realise they might be incapable of doing this now. The pressure is so much now. That is why I said that I'm kind of being vindicated from my previous article, because I think the pressure is now kind of like piling on this office. That's why I say expect fireworks. The pressure, something's going to buckle.
Yeah, it seems like multiple layers of pressure are developing. It's almost like a perfect storm that cannot, like for 70 plus years, the government has been capable of somehow dodging this bullet, as it were. But now, I feel like there's so many forces that are coming from every angle and direction that there's just no way they can continue doing what they did. So ultimately, if they truly do, and I'm not saying they do, I believe they do, but I don't know that they do. So ultimately, if they truly do have high fidelity scientific data proving that there are simply vehicles in our airspace and in our oceans that don't stem from adversaries, that's just going to have to come out, because the Congress, who controls the purse strings, as you were saying, is not allowing them to get away with anything but the truth. So do you think like it's inevitable now that it's just whatever that truth is, whether it's what the skeptics say it is or whether it's what we may think it is, it's coming and there's nothing to stop it? Or is that the impression you're under?
Absolutely. Firstly, I think, I'm starting to actually think to myself, actually we all want the same thing. The skeptics want data, we want data. This is where we're at now. I think for the last few months, it was to actually get Congress to take this seriously. This is why all the activism took place, to actually kind of get the legislation on the table. That's worked. And now, actually, I think in a way, apart from kind of like the horrible and sly remarks of the likes of Lou and Corbell and whatnot, I think we're on the same page. We just want the data.
Absolutely.
We want compelling data. And he's just telling us what it is. And you know what? There's a nuclear option. If there is some way that they can still obfuscate this stuff, hearings, be like, okay, I've had enough of this. We'll go for hearings.
And whatever they find, I'm going to give it a lot of weight. I mean, I cynically get this impression that there are some skeptics out there that are like, oh, that guy? Nah, that guy, he's just not going to believe whatever the government comes to. He's just not going to believe it. Well, no, that's not true. That's not true. I believe there's limitations with obfuscation. Yeah, I understand it when no one's pressuring the government the way they are now, they can get away with it. But at a certain point, I don't think they can get away with it. So if ultimately this all ends up just being drones or some misunderstanding, and that's solidified over the coming years, I'll be like, okay, then I was wrong. And that's the way it goes. And I just want to add this: it's kind of strange that some skeptics seem to not want to. I get the impression, and maybe I'm wrong, but it feels like some skeptics aren't real enthusiastic about what's going on now. It's almost like they're just like, "No, we don't want this. Let's just start ignoring UAP. Let's talk some sense into the Congress to stop badgering the intelligence agencies and the military to give them data. This is just a waste of taxpayer dollars. It's a waste of time. What are we doing?" And it's like, hello, skeptic, if that's you, maybe not all skeptics, but some skeptics, don't you want to be vindicated? You have had this mantra for decades. There's nothing to see here. Well, let's see if there's nothing to see here. Why would you not want to pursue the data? Why would you downplay the necessity to pursue the data? That's a head scratcher for me.
Absolutely, completely agree with that assessment. Now is the time to put up or shut up, in my opinion. It's going to come out. At the end of the day, skeptics aren't talking. Sorry, congressmen and senators aren't talking about, oh, is it a balloon, or is this kind of like some kind of psyop or something like that? No, they've seen the classified material. They've seen the classified material, and from my understanding, this has changed lives. From my understanding of talking to my sources, those who have actually seen the data, it has shifted their way of thinking about the whole world. That will probably come out.
I think as this continues, because yes, the Congress is going to get classified briefings, but that doesn't mean. Do you think that it doesn't mean that they can't talk about it in general terms in the same way that Lou Elizondo talks about it? I mean, they've already started doing that, and if they're going to get more and more, so here's my thought is that they're going to get more and more classified briefings. It's written into the legislation. So either those additional classified briefings are going to increase the rhetoric when it comes to UAP or a true mystery and maybe of extraterrestrial origin, or alternatively, it would seem like they would decrease it and be like, oh, now we have more information. Some of the stuff we said before, not so fact-based. What do you think about that?
So I think it's going to be a matter of deduction. I think they're going to rule out other explanations when it comes to this. I think from listening to the likes of Heinrich, for example, and Romney, I think there is compelling data that exists that people have seen that just states that, look, this isn't Russian, this isn't Chinese. And I think it's going to make people's jaw drop. I really think it's going to make people's jaw drop when they actually see this kind of stuff, from what I'm hearing anyhow. So I think all these other theories and stuff are going to be ruled out once the data comes out and once the video is released. And I think we're going to really... And also, in addition as well, I mean, I heard Dan Zetterstrom speak earlier today as well. And Dan, you can correct me if I'm wrong later. There was legislation that came out within the Omnibus Bill that's going to allow people to speak out more freely, hopefully, in terms of this kind of stuff. And you and I both know that there are people out there who have lost their jobs within the military for seeing the UFO. And I think those will come out. You will get more of those coming out, especially in hearings and stuff. Okay, so firstly, if there's nothing credible about UFOs, why people lose their job for it? It's just the persecution that these people are coming under. It's just heartbreaking. It really, really is heartbreaking. Also, I think what we'll see as well, we're going to see people come out with health problems in terms of what's happened. It was mentioned to me by Colin Kelleher that there was psychological trauma associated with the Nimitz incident, for instance. And from my understanding, I believe, let's say, from my belief, I think there are more aircraft involved in the Nimitz incident. I think people like that will start coming out as well. I think there's so much more to this. I think, like Lou said, we've only just scratched the surface of this iceberg. There's so much more to it that's going to come out. The details are going to be very, very disturbing. And look, I don't know of any Chinese or Russian technology at all, especially on drones and stuff, that can cause loss of time, which is being reported. And this is a serious incident at the end of the day in terms of what's happening. I mean, you've got admirals calling up Lou, for example, from what Lou has said, saying, look, this stuff is over my fleet and I'm having to evacuate the sailors below deck.
Just so they don't have to look at it.
Can you imagine the alarm?
Is that...
Yeah, they're evacuating them below deck. And I
Okay,
can
that makes
imagine
sense.
also there may be some
Right.
health implications via it, because this is the threat assessment. This is the threat assessment here, because there's a difference between threat and hostile intent. This is what people mix up all the time. You know, if if you're basically at the back of a jumbo jet, you know, that's a threat because that's a threat to your life. But if the jumbo jet's coming towards you, looking to run you over or something, you know, that's hostile intent because it's doing it. But I think there may be a reason behind that in terms of evacuating people below deck as well, because there may be health impacts associated to what these things are. It's very, very scary. It's very, very alarming. And I think that it's going to be very, very shocking when it all comes out. I think the least... I think, you know, if I'm within the DoD and don't want this info out, I do not want public hearings. I do not want public hearings. This is why they should.
I know
cooperate.
Congressman Andre Carson has called for public hearings, and Elizondo said that others have called, not publicly, but that others have been interested in having public hearings. So hopefully, do you think public hearings will happen?
They may happen. They may. So I mean, there's various things that we need to take into account. So firstly, in terms of public hearings, there may very well at the moment be preparations for public hearings. Those preparations could have been going on for months now, but it takes a very, very long time to prepare for hearings. You need to make sure that you've got all your witnesses, all your speakers sorted out. You need to choose who you're going to speak to. You've got to have all your questions planned out, all the evidence that's going to be presented, and you need to plan everything methodically. You've got to, every detail has got to be looked through with a fine tooth, basically, because you've got one shot at this, and any mistake could just lead to this being a catastrophe, basically. So you've got to really plan it carefully. To get it right, you need to plan it carefully. And the other thing I would state as well is that, I mean, I've spoken to people who have predicted that we could potentially see hearings next year, but then again, that's dependent on midterms, for instance. So if Biden is a lame duck president, that may affect whether there's hearings and stuff. So it's in flux, I say. There's a lot of unknowns, but it could be interesting. It could be interesting, and I think, as I said, the nuclear option is basically that, you know, politicians become so fed up. That, like,
So this is a good segue into my question. How do you see the media functioning in this landscape as this continues to unfurl and as it accelerates and intensifies? How do you see the media? Like, do you think there's going to come a time where, like, this is like what's covered by all the news networks more than anything else? And and another question I would ask is, do you think, and also, like, how do you see Liberation Times, your publication, dealing with the escalation of this subject, if that indeed happens? And finally, do you think another video will be released? Because I know that recently Elizondo has been doing a lot of interviews, and more than once he said that there are implications that something like the 23-minute video that's he's talked about, that's not grainy and is extremely compelling and far more compelling and far higher fidelity than the 3 videos released so far, that might actually end up getting released. So how do you see the media landscape dealing with this as this might explode onto the scene even further than it already has?
Absolutely, yeah. So there's something called media values, basically. So to kind of like, to make a big story, what ingredients do you need? If it's just a report, you know, I think the report that came out in 2021 was bombshell because it led to further action. Obviously, something compelled, you know, Congress to take this forward to. So I thought that was really, really big. But at the end of the day, media is looking for videos. They want videos, and they want images. They want kind of like really, really good witnesses coming forward and stuff like that. So if we get any of those things, I think then we could see like a really, really big story in the media that will follow this. I can see an escalation happening. I mean, I thought, but then again, it's very, very difficult because I thought there'd be more media coverage once Biden actually signed the NDAA 2022. Because you remember when Trump signed it for a UAP task force to actually have a report for June. I mean, there was lots of media interest then, so I thought at least we'd see the same thing with Biden, but we didn't. And I thought that was really, really strange that didn't really come out. It just seemed that the news media had lost interest after the June report came up, because they had basically built it up so much that we were expecting like a big video to come out or something like that, or a big speech by Joe Biden, but obviously that didn't happen. I mean, if I listen to people like Tom DeLonge, for instance, who claims that, you know, he had a proposition to actually get this info out, then, you know, he's basically stated that you can't expect a speech from, you know, the president, and it won't come out the way that you think it's going to come out. So it's very interesting when you think about it like that, because if the truth is shocking and this is orchestrated in some fashion, then you can imagine it's kind of like, I don't want to put it too crudely, but it's kind of like boiling a frog. You don't want to like boil it too much, if you know what I mean. And yeah, so you've got to, so this is kind of just making, to normalise this topic that could be alarming. And in terms of Liberation Times, we're always on the lookout for really good stories and stuff, and obviously we've got some really good sources that can provide us some really accurate and detailed information. I think that our role is, obviously we're not a big like news outlet, so what we'll be looking to do is any exclusives that we can get, we'll be looking to get that out in partnership with other news publications, you know, whether that's the LA Times or Politico or the Daily Mail in the UK. So we'll be looking to kind of work in partnership, I think, to get the stories out, and also to ensure that these stories come out in a compelling way and are actually factually correct as well when they're reported. So that's the role that I think that we can play in terms of Liberation Times. But for myself, for example, I mean, I don't know. The future is uncertain. I work in public relations at the moment. I really enjoy journalism. So, I mean, I'm even willing to basically just do an internship or something like that in journalism, maybe for the BBC, maybe for Sky News in the UK or something like that. And then maybe once I'm within a big establishment, I could kind of carry on my role in reporting this. I don't know, but I want to keep Liberation Times going in some form. And I think at first, because make or break time for the publication comes summer this year, and at first, my instinct was to basically not let it go on any further because it really wasn't paying the bills, and it takes a long time to write stories and stuff. But
yeah, because I really like your articles, and I've read a lot of articles, obviously, by other journalists who cover this, and I think that your articles stand alone. I think you bring something to the table that nobody else brings, and that's just my opinion. And so it would be a real shame if Liberation Times stopped doing what it's doing. But it's funny. I heard what's that? Oh God, Ross Coulthart. Yeah, I heard Ross Coulthart say that Liberation Times sounds like a far left publication. So I want to ask, which it's not, but he said that's what it sounds like. How did you come up with that name for the publication? What exactly is behind that name, Liberation Times?
Yeah, really good question there. I was just looking for a name that gave it credibility. If I called my website like UFO Zone or something like that, straight away it's like fringe, and it's got all these connotations and stuff. I looked at the debrief, for example. The debrief, you look at that and you see a UFO story, you think, okay, cool. It's from a publication called The Debrief. Let's have a look at it. So it makes it kind of like more compelling to read a story from something called Liberation Times, because it seems like it's more
what
official.
What about Liberation? Like, what's behind Liberation?
It's got times in it and Liberation. So you got La Liberation in France, which is like a big newspaper. So I was kind of like trying to like play on that, let's say, because it's like I think it's called the La Liberation. You got the. Yeah, I might get it wrong, but there's a publication called like Liberation in France, and I thought like that was quite cool because we didn't have anything with that name in the UK or the US, so I was thinking of just kind of like bringing that kind of name to
awesome.
Kind of like
so I think we can wrap this up. So thank you so much for coming on to the Post-Disclosure World show, I guess, and let the audience know, because I'm a huge fan of your publication. I read every article you put out, but let the audience know where they can find
Yeah.
social media and so forth?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so I'm on there as on Twitter, for example. I'm on Twitter as Real C Sharp, which is my handle. So Real C is the letter, and Sharp without an E on the end. And then you can find the handle for Liberation Times, which is just Liberation Times is the handle, no spaces between. And then the Liberation Times website is www.liberationtimes.com.
Thank you so much for watching. Please do not forget to subscribe. If you'd like to support this channel, you can check out my merch shop where I sell t-shirts. You can become a patron. You can become a YouTube member. You can give me a one-time donation. All of those possibilities is in the description below. Or you could just slap a like on this bad boy and I'll appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for watching and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Special thanks to all patrons, YouTube members, those that have bought merch, those that have given me a one-time donation. I couldn't do without you. Thank you so much. See you in the next episode.